Hello, and welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Randy Bass. I'm the director of the Red House and vice president for strategic education initiatives here at Georgetown, and we're really delighted that you're joining us today. Wanted to welcome you to the kickoff to our series on third spaces in education, brought to you by the Red House and the Baker Trust for Transformative Learning. For anyone who doesn't know who we are, the Red House is an educational innovation unit at Georgetown that exists for the sole purpose of helping the university move farther and faster in new educational directions than it might otherwise go on its own. We've been operating since 2014, and our work is supported by philanthropic resources, including and especially the Baker Trust for Transformative Learning. Over those years, our key themes have always included topics like, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches, problem-based and challenge-based learning, expanded learning spaces that engage students as partners and create more porous boundaries between the classroom and the world. So it's out of these themes and these interests that our interests in third spaces emerge, especially in this moment as we're coming out of the pandemic and the adaptation to the pandemic, and asking what new and next kinds of learning experiences should we be stimulating here at Georgetown and modeling for elsewhere. So for us, our definition of third spaces, which you'll hear more than once today, I'm sure, is that third spaces can be defined as integrative learning experiences that bring together academics, faculty, students, and staff, what we might think of as the first space, with industry, community, and government partners, the second space, to create a new third space, new sites of interaction that at the very least are characterized by valuing students as partners, transcending institutional boundaries, addressing complex challenges, and valuing multiple knowledge types and perspectives for mutual learning. So we're delighted to have with us today Bem Le Hunte, who I'll introduce in a moment, to kick us off. Bem is here to help provide us a definitional foundation and a very initial engagement with the community around these issues. We'll be scheduling more talks later in the spring and into next fall with folks like Bem who are putting third spaces into action, as well as hosting campus workshops and eventually funding opportunities to incentivize faculty, students, and staff to imagine third space learning opportunities as new signature pedagogies at Georgetown. We also want to learn from the community what kind of infrastructure and support might be needed to enable the development and growth and spread of third spaces. So we have lots of ambitions, plans, hopes, and dreams, and it all begins today. So with that, let me introduce Bem Le Hunte, who we're thrilled to have with us. So you have her bio there and also in the flyer. But Bem is an internationally published novelist and expert in the field of creative intelligence, thinking creatively across disciplinary constraints. She's the director of learning and teaching at the TD School at University of Technology, Sydney, as well as the founding course director of the multi-award winning Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation. She teaches creative thinking, theory, and practice across many disciplines, from anthropology to media and creative writing, and works with academics all across all faculties at UTS, as well as with an industry partnership base of over 2,000 individuals to create and support this world-first award-winning future-facing transdisciplinary degree. She's worked across 3 decades in a broad range of creative industries, from advertising and journalism to publishing in new media, and has many wonderful books online that you should check out. Many of which come from previous lives and careers. But we're thrilled to have Bem here today to help us really establish a strong foundation for what third spaces are and how they can work in education. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Bem. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Randy. And I'm just going to share my screen for a second. Give me 1 second and I'll just put this on. Yeah, so welcome. I'd like to, well, in my tradition in Australia, we start by welcoming and welcoming everyone and acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on, which in my case is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose knowledge pre-existed our institutions. And Randy mentioned that I'm a novelist, and I thought that I'd just start off by telling you a few stories about how I came to this whole idea of third spaces. So I have been the course director of this degree, and we didn't know that the idea of a third space when we were creating it. It was something that is retrospective. We've done the research retrospectively, but we just had an instinct that we wanted to create these incredible porous boundaries that Randy was talking about. And this is how I might describe myself, as an expert in radical unknowing. And I'm offering this quote from Lewis Hyde from one of my favorite books called The Gift. And he writes, "If when we work, we can look once a day upon the face of mystery, then our labor satisfies. We are lightened when our gifts rise from pools we cannot fathom." So I want to tell stories and then hand over to you to tell your stories. So a little bit of a story of the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation. It was founded in 2014, and we didn't really understand what it was that we were creating, but it was a transdisciplinary degree created at first for 18 different disciplines. So it was combined, accelerated, and had students from every single faculty at our university within the program. Now, why did we do it? Firstly, because our problems are more connected and complex than ever before, and single disciplines can no longer tackle those complex challenges and come up with unusual solutions. Secondly, we wanted to do a curriculum for being, not just knowing, because the knowledge was so transitory, moving so fast, that we wanted to focus on creating learners and focusing on being. And I'll get more to that in a minute. And lastly, we have students who apparently are going to be doing 17 different jobs through a journey of a lifetime across 5 completely different industries. So with that in mind, we cannot just teach knowledge. So this transdisciplinary degree was very challenge-based, very problem-based, and it brought together students from the Faculty of Law, from engineering and IT, from design, from business, from health, from science, and so on. A lot of these quotes are quite remarkable. People were so surprised at what they could do when they started this transdisciplinary curriculum. So transdisciplinarity, what is it? It's a confluence of the disciplines. Students work in transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary teams, and they tackle these challenges together. The environment for learning is intensely creative. So we've designed not lectures and tutorials, but active learning. So students might learn one of several hundred creative methods and then get to trial it out on a brief. They might do an ideas arena exercise where they explore ideas from cutting edges of all our disciplines. They might do a straw man proposal or a hackathon or a think tank and so on. You get the idea. The learning has to be creative because this is a very emergent space. And the learning is transformative. And I think that meets your theme really beautifully. So the learning is all about helping transform learners' capabilities and the way they see themselves, and transformative in the sense that they are not the same people who started the program. They describe themselves as completely different people by the time they graduate. And what's more, they feel that they have this real impact in the world, and they graduate wanting to change the world. That's the biggest sort of, the kind of anxiety, if you like, that they graduate with. How can I change the world quickly enough? There's intense industry engagement. I think we mentioned we have over 2,000 industry partners from over 800 organizations, and they include, the big 4 or 5 consultancies. They include international, multinational companies. They include innovation consultancies. They include right down to startups and social impact organizations. And students work on these challenges from the very first year in their very first school. It's not saved for final years or postgraduate students. And so they develop really close relationships with our industry partners. So what I'd like you to do now is to go into a chat room and in pairs, spend 5 minutes, maybe a couple of minutes each, telling the story of a profound and transformative learning experience that you've had. If you could do that, and then maybe in 6 minutes, let's say 3 minutes each, if you could time yourself, we'll pull you back into this arena and then we'll move on from there. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I would love it if I could ask you one simple question and you could respond in the chat. Did any of you have a story that took place in a classroom? There are a few people who are saying yes. Mm-hmm. And that's amazing if you had that transformative experience in the classroom. But generally, what happens when you do this exercise is people's really profound learning often happens completely outside of a classroom, which is why this whole idea of third space is valuable. How do you capture the profound learning that happens outside of the traditional learning experience? So I'll move on now I was asked to give some simple definitions. And I wrote an article with a colleague, Deirdre Clegeta, who actually introduced me to the concept of third spaces. She's an educational researcher. I was just doing the practice of creating third spaces without actually knowing that it had some theory behind it. But here is a quick Venn diagram. We created an article we wrote together called Stepping In and Stepping Out. And it describes the third space. So students as partners, co-teachers, co-inquirers, curriculum co-creators, co-learners. And in our context, it's completely transdisciplinary. So it deals with complexity, real world challenges, multiple knowledges, lots of collaboration, mutual learning that comes out of that. And the third space in education, the theory is that it transcends institutional boundaries. I was just calling it a porous space before. It brings people together with diverse roles, and it's got this very holistic notion of academic practice. So it's got that holism, or what I call holiness, kind of, it's got that lovely completeness about it. Here are some of the qualities that I describe to third spaces. So the first idea is the idea of liminality. Liminality is a concept that first came from anthropology. It came from people like Victor Turner. And he talked about liminality in the context of tribal societies that have initiation. So liminality is when you go from one state to another. So it's really about going to a state of unknowing, if you like. For me, third spaces are radically inclusive. So they have students as partners, but there's this real equality of learners. There's been lots written about students learning from industry partners, but what about industry partners learning from students? We have that happening in our classroom and beyond. It's got this idea of porosity. Like I said, I called it porosity. I always said I wanted to create a completely porous space for industry, community, and government partners. And this is well beyond the idea of classroom with no walls, because the classroom, actually, you're learning in completely different ways as well. There is no classroom as such. The learner makes sense of everything. And one thing about transdisciplinary work that I find really interesting is built into our manifesto with the BCII. And that is the idea that no student graduates the same. So there's lots of sense making happening in the system. Feedback loops. This is an innovation ecosystem. So we have industry partners in there, we have our students in there, we have our alumni who become industry partners, and so on. It's a transdisciplinary and very creative space. Transdisciplinarity is always creative. It has to be, because you cannot predict when 2 disciplines or more, 3, 4, 5 disciplines come together, or students from many different epistemologies like being and background come together, what is going to happen. So we have the dinner party metaphor from the United Nations. UNESCO came up with this idea for transdisciplinarity, where multidisciplinarity was a dinner party where, or a banquet where people bring a potluck and it's a mishmash and it doesn't really work together. And interdisciplinarity might be, okay, we'll do Mexican, you bring the guacamole and someone else brings the beans and so on. Whereas transdisciplinarity is the idea of people getting together, cooking together, deciding who they're going to invite and making those stakeholders welcome, and doing the whole thing collaboratively. Another quality for third space for me is this centrality of being, not just knowing. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. It's also it's about going into the unknown or uncertainty and feeling okay with that and managing your own feelings in that space. It's about active learning, often, problem-based learning. It's often about tackling big challenges that require people to think in very complex ways and to invite disciplines in. It's about really open briefs, and we've designed so many open briefs that allow people to bring in their passions, because the world is more open, dynamic, and complex than it ever was. And our problems too are networked together. So looking at it from just one challenge perspective or one disciplinary perspective isn't enough. So this idea of holism, again, is this quality that I'd like to bring to it. So let me just explain away some of these ideas around liminality. I think I talked about Victor Turner, and it came originally from Van Gennep, this idea and this word liminality from the anthropologists around ritual. But it also happens in an educational journey. And it also happens in the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, where heroes from myths around the world go into this sort of cycle where they separate from the known world and they disappear into the unknown world, which is seen also as an initiation, a liminal phase, an initiation of knowledge and tackling obstacles, ordeals, where you tackle that obstacle, then you get the boon of the obstacle, which makes you richer in educational context. It makes you more knowledgeable, gives you the power of your learning. So really dipping into the unknown and then returning. And this diagram doesn't have it, but Joseph Campbell talks about the return being marked by a sense of atonement. And I call that at-one-ment. How do you feel more at one with all the knowledges and the multiple perspectives that you've come across? So this is about, there's a quote I have here from the article that we have above. I'll just let you read it for a minute. But so liminality and creative process are about being able to go between the conventional ordinary world and this liminal creative immersive process, or third space, where things merge, where you're continually finding your way and making discoveries. And this is a really creative space because you can't predict what will happen. We put students from many disciplines and we give them a challenge. We can't do the standard constructive alignment. Here's what you're going to come up with. We don't know what they're going to come up with. And that's the beautiful work. And it surprises us and delights us, this work that they do. Transdisciplinarity is a very important aspect of this third space. So transdisciplinarity is a practice that transcends disciplines and fields, extending the notion of what is known and knowable and what is possible to discover and create, between and beyond, cross between and beyond all our disciplines. This is a quote I gave trying to sum up what transdisciplinarity is. And I think the important bit that people forget is to create as well. So you're creating new knowledge. You're not just the consumer of knowledge, you're a producer of knowledge. We don't want that static sort of transactional education that is traditional didactic sage on the stage. We're much more about the guide on the side, meddler in the middle, or whatever, but it's not talking at people. We know that that kind of knowledge is not remembered, is easily forgotten. So we're interested in creating being, transforming beings. So this is a lovely quote, but I encourage you to look at Niculescu's Charter of Transdisciplinarity. You can find it online. It's a very quick read, but it's a beautiful, profound document of the need for transdisciplinarity. And he writes, only a form of intelligence capable of grasping the cosmic dimension of the present conflicts is able to confront the complexity of our world and the present challenge of the spiritual and material self-destruction of the human species. I love that idea of the cosmic dimension. And so this is my cosmic image for transdisciplinarity. It's about the ocean. It's about oceanic knowledge. Dipping people in an ocean is quite a challenge. So you do have to create boundaries. You have to give them a brief or a challenge where they have creative constraints to work against. It's also about radical inclusion and equality of learners. And I read out these two quotes from a couple of students who wrote with us. So we research with our partners, we co-design with them, with our students, and we go way beyond the students as partners because they're partners of our industry partners as well. So it's a multi-level partnership and there's no levels at all at the same time. So this is the quote from Cameron. I've never really known what to call the staff. I don't see them as teachers or lecturers or even mentors in a traditional sense. When we're in our third space, our roles quickly melt away. We're placed in this environment where we must work together as partners to get the most out of the experience and be our best selves. I find that statement really telling because it really speaks to the relationships that we build and the importance of relationships, equal partnerships. And Dominica says, for me, a classic example of third space, we're in the middle of a conversation and a tutor comes in and asks the right question. The conversation feels lifted. There's something about the quality of the questioning. There is vulnerability in their curiosity. I find that just brilliant because we are so vulnerable as teachers in this space. We are not on an academic pedestal as experts. I almost feel like I'm a professor of ignorance. I'm just supporting their learning. And the learning is through the space and the challenge and their own curiosity. So she says the curiosity and willingness to ask questions is important. Your roles fade away. So on the left is a lovely slide, and in that big blue circle, you'll find a tiny little dot, and that is what is known, and that's a focus of cleverness. And what is unknown is so huge. Tackling unknowns is such an important part of third space work and transdisciplinary work because you don't know what students are going to come up with, as I said. So that's a slide from a colleague, Professor Stuart Hill in Sydney, but on the right is an ignorance mind map, and it comes from the work of Anne Kerwin, who created a taxonomy of unknowns. And she talked about all of these kinds of unknowns. So we create a kind of ignorance mapping activity in BCII, where we ask students to explore a problem space using this lens as one of many, many lenses, but very important one to help them get comfortable with unknowns. So we have that first known unknowns, all the things you know you don't know. For example, in research into disease, you might know this about Parkinson's disease, but you know that you still have to discover X, Y, Z. An unknown is often that creative field, the complete unknown. And it's hard to understand what you don't know if you don't know it, right? And then the next category, misknowns, errors, things that you think you know, but you simply don't. And then unknown knowns, that's all the tacit knowledge that you are taught not to trust, dreams, intuition, so on. And then taboo knowledge, which is dangerous ideas, and denial, things that you don't want to know. And we have a few more of those that we add to that list, Van Kerwin's. This idea of the centrality of being, not just knowing. I'm really inspired by the work of Ronald Barnett, who writes about learning for unknown futures, being much more about learning for being or ontology rather than learning information or knowledge, epistemology. So one of the things that transdisciplinarity is supposed to create is this idea of the T-shaped graduate. So that depth is in a single discipline. So all of our students do a core discipline, and then they have this broad breadth of knowledge. And that comes through all of the academics from many different disciplines who teach into the program. The learning comes from all the students who come from their many different disciplines and contribute their knowledges in their teamwork, but also through assessments like, you know, bring your own BYO education, for example. They teach each other what they need to know about the various disciplines. So that's the T-shaped profile. But I like to take that a step further with this whole curriculum for being idea. To go from knowing to being, this requires whole being. So I use an integral learning framework from the work of an Indian philosopher called Sri Aurobindo, who talks about the many levels of being. And I try and integrate that into the classroom too, the physical, the emotional or vital, the mental, which is what we just focus on in a university environment, psychic, spiritual, and so on. And one of the things that I'm really inspired by is the idea of combining unity and diversity. And I believe that this is one of the original ideas of a university, to create a holistic, unified vision of the disciplines where there can be a confluence, a real confluence in learning happening, as well as honoring that diversity to create that university. Inspired by this whole idea of ontology being more important than epistemology, the being more important than the knowing. And I love the work of Nell Noddings in this regard and the importance of caring for the knower. So we say in BCII that there are many knowledges, but only one knower. And it's about creating that sense-making and wisdom that comes with that kind of deep transdisciplinary work and multiple ways of knowing, well beyond the disciplines, going right into that kind of indigenous knowledges, other ways of seeing the world that our university systems simply don't privilege, because they're very focused on these Newtonian Cartesian kind of worldviews. So it is a real expansion of worldviews. And I think that that's one of the most transformative things that can happen in a program that really explores third space. Just want to talk about the outcomes and the possibilities of these third spaces. The word affordances comes from the architectural language, affordances of furniture or food in a space. But I'm talking about in this kind of virtual space, what are the affordances and possibilities? And I'm part of the Possibilities Studies Network, which sees possibilities from multidisciplinary lenses. And one of the incredible possibilities that has come, outcomes, if you like, is reputation. Having an innovation ecosystem where we have over 800 partners has just been an extraordinary boost for UTS's, because and there's a press around every charge that they set for our students, and more and more people interested because they hear about it, about students globally, it's quite bizarre. One of the other things is extraordinary alumni engagement. Can you hear? I'm being told that my internet is unstable. Yeah. So the alumni engagement, we have this saying that nobody leaves the BCII, and it's so true because I see them all the time. They're at orientation. They arrive back offering internships to our current students. They work as industry partners, setting industry challenges in fourth year. And by the way, in fourth year, every student group has their own industry partner, and they get to choose which partners they want. One of the other things that happens is these breakthrough solutions and interventions. Often they're not solutions, they're interventions, because you can't solve things in a complex problem. You create an intervention and then or a safe to fail experiment, and then you amplify it or dampen it, depending on whether it's success or not. So we have these really original ideas popping up that our industry partners will often use. Often the ideas will be taken to the boards of these companies, and our students are presenting at boards, and so on. And because they're so welcomed into the organizational worlds, a lot of this mutual learning takes place. And we're writing a paper after having interviewed all of our industry partners on what this mutual learning looks like. And what we've discovered is that there is so much learning happening in the organization itself. So our partners are learning, not just our students. A lot of university education, you think about sending your students out to get an internship, and that's the standard work integrated learning approach. But what if you could create a system where your industry partners wanted to know more about what's happening in the classroom and wanted to learn some of the methods that are taking place in the classroom? What a lot of our students say is that they learn so many methods and so many approaches during the course of their degree that they then go out and they join an organization and they're only using one method that's patented. And that incredible freedom has gone that they developed the capacity for in university. So we're working now on educating our partners. We now have a master's program, Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation, which is BCII for people who aren't 18 anymore. Another thing that happens is a lot of the research partnerships develop from these learning partnerships. So we've now started up something called CoLab, where we put industry challenges through a lab process, a lot of academic disciplines into it. And these are often partners that have run challenges for our students or internships, because they can contribute on many levels, right from offering a lecture through to running a 3 or 4 year engagement, through to hosting a team, having internships, employing students. And I should say that I'll get to that, but the employment rates are incredible. Developing inner being and agency, this transformative learning ends up with many, many peak experiences. And I've written about that elsewhere. I won't go into it now, but there are so many peak experiences. Students develop a radically new approach to learning, and that filters through the university. So staff understand a new approach to learning. They adopt these practices in their core disciplines when they leave our little ecosystem and go back to their faculties. And I was going to say something about long-term employability. UTS has 76% employment rate within, I think, 4 months of leaving university. BCII students have around 93%, and that's because over 40% of them are employed directly by industry partners who have worked with them and see what they're capable of and snap them up. I mean, they harvest the email addresses when they come and set a challenge. So they set challenges for a whole school in first year to third year, and then students get to manage their own partners in fourth year and then create their own challenges. I've written a little bit about challenges of third space, and then I want you to just do a little bit of work on what this might look like in your space. So there's a lot of problem around university fiefdoms, this idea of ownership of knowledges, and even ownership of transdisciplinarity, and the idea that it should be in a faculty of design or a faculty of engineering and so on, when really it is a trans-university endeavor. So the lack of the unified vision is a challenge, I believe. In the university vision I showed you, that unity is somehow missing. I describe a lack of imagination to envisage a totally different learning environment, and it's only a lack of imagination that stops us from doing it. The idea that academics sometimes have a challenge realigning to the possibilities. Often they haven't worked in industry, and having an industry partner and brief is a new idea for them. So one of the things that a third space has really benefited from in our university is top-down support from the chancellery down. It requires visionaries and mavericks. It really requires people to push the innovation agenda, because institutions on their own are not innovative, individuals are. And those mavericks really need to be encouraged, because that's what creates the beautiful risk of learning, of education, that Biesta talks about, for example, creating those wonderful learning experiences. One of the things that is a challenge is this very process-driven waterfall kind of, this is what has to happen in a learning environment, or a transactional model. Students are coming here, we're trying to get sort of bums on seats. All of that is a very important reality of a university organization, but you need to slip under the radar a little bit in order to thrive and experiment in a third space, like the one we've created, for example. The challenge of measurement. This was a real challenge when you're under scrutiny and you're starting off. People didn't want to, come from other faculties to support it. Not all of them, because they feared losing the recognition in their faculties, and yet we wanted the best of all the faculties to contribute. The problem of measurement disappeared after we'd been running it for a while, because the values that we were trying to promote were not easy to measure, that we wanted to promote values such as creativity and purpose and transformation. How do you measure all of that? Well, eventually we got to measure it in the numbers of students that wanted to do the program and the number of awards we've won. We've won so many national and international awards now, and even won, from Universities Australia to Business Higher Education Roundtable to Wharton Award to Green Gown Award, international and local, to the University Medal for Research Teaching Integration, because we've published a lot around this work as well. The other thing I think is a bit of a challenge is the whole idea of managing and communicating properly with partners, because they're not used to working with a university in this way. So there's all these challenges that we learned about, their expectations, IP arrangements and how they get negotiated, where, for example, some organizations want to keep the IP and some students want to own, and they're allowed to own. And all of those things have to be worked through really carefully so that you don't let down industry partners or students, and to make it less transactional. Here are a couple of challenges that a few challenges I've pulled out quotes for. I'll just let you read them.